"You are being completely selfish, Maya," my stepmother, Victoria, sighed, taking a delicate sip of her expensive mimosa. "Chloe's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. The country club venue alone is $50,000. We are simply borrowing against your trust fund to cover the premium catering, the imported floral arrangements, and the live entertainment. You will still have plenty left over for whatever it is you do." I sat across from her at the country club dining table, staring at the massive stack of vendor contracts she had just arrogantly slapped onto the glass surface. The morning sun was shining through the large windows, catching the absurdly large diamond engagement ring on my stepsister Chloe's finger. To execute a flawless financial trap, you have to understand the psychology of your target. Victoria and Chloe operated entirely on optics and ego. They were so blinded by the sparkling chandeliers and the imported silk napkins that they never once considered the actual mechanics of the money they were spending. They assumed the legal system was just a formality, a rubber stamp for their desires. The next morning, I sat in the sprawling, mahogany-paneled conference room of my late father's law firm. Mr. Sterling sat across from me, a thick leather binder open on the table. He was a man who had spent 40 years destroying corporate fraudsters, and he had a deep, personal loyalty to my father. "Your father was a paranoid man, Maya," Mr. Sterling said, tapping his gold pen against the trust documents. "And I say that with the utmost respect. He knew Victoria was impulsive. So, while he did include the vital family welfare clause that she used to get the judge's approval, he also buried a countermeasure in Section 4, Paragraph C. He slid the document across the table to me. I looked at the densely packed legal jargon. "The beneficiary right of audit," I read aloud, a cold smile slowly forming on my face. "Exactly," Mr. Sterling nodded, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. "Any beneficiary who is within 30 days of the trust's full maturation date has the unilateral right to demand an immediate forensic audit if they suspect the acting trustee is committing fiduciary mismanagement. The moment we file this demand, the bank is legally obligated by federal law to instantly freeze all trust assets. No money goes in, and absolutely no money goes out until the audit is complete, and a forensic audit takes a minimum of 90 days. So, the judge's order for the $100,000 is basically overridden?" I asked. "The judge authorized the withdrawal," Mr. Sterling clarified. "But federal banking regulations supersede local court orders when fraud or mismanagement is formally alleged by the primary beneficiary. The bank's compliance department will lock the vault immediately to protect their own liability. Victoria won't know a thing until she tries to move the cash." "File it," I said without a second of hesitation. "File it today." For the next week, I played my part perfectly. I went to the dress fittings. I smiled at the bridal showers. I sat quietly in the corner while Chloe acted like a tyrant, screaming at wedding planners over the exact shade of ivory for the table runners. Victoria strutted around the country club, dropping my father's last name to get premium treatment, loudly bragging to her socialite friends about the blank check she had written for her daughter's special day. They treated me like a ghost in my own life. They thought I was defeated. I was just watching the clock. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday the 15th. The critical day was Thursday the 14th. That was the day the massive final payments were due. The vendors had been extremely clear. If the final wire transfers did not clear their accounts by 5:00 p.m. on Thursday, no one was showing up on Saturday. No food, no flowers, no music, no wedding. On Thursday morning, I woke up early. I made myself a cup of dark roast coffee and sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city wake up. The air was cool and crisp. It felt like the perfect day for an execution. At precisely 10:00 a.m., Victoria walked into the premier branch of Liberty Wealth Management. I wasn't there, but my father's old contacts at the bank later painted the picture for me with absolute clarity. She marched up to the private executive desk, wearing her designer sunglasses indoors, and casually asked the wealth manager to execute the wire transfers to the florist, the caterer, and the venue. She had already written the checks and signed the authorizations. She was just waiting for the $100,000 from my trust to clear into her checking account to cover them. The wealth manager typed her account number into the system. He paused. He typed it again. The color slowly drained from his face. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance," the manager said nervously, turning his monitor slightly. "I cannot process these wire transfers. Your checking account does not have the sufficient funds." Victoria let out an arrogant, condescending laugh. "Check the incoming transfers from the primary trust. The judge approved the disbursement last week. The $100,000 should have posted at midnight." The manager swallowed hard, his fingers trembling over the keyboard. "Ma'am, the primary trust account has a code for federal hold. It has been completely frozen pending a mandatory forensic audit for alleged fiduciary mismanagement. No funds have been released. No funds will be released." Victoria stopped breathing. Her designer sunglasses slipped slightly down her nose. "Frozen? What do you mean frozen? Who ordered an audit?" "The primary beneficiary, ma'am," the manager whispered. "Maya Vance. Her legal counsel filed the injunction 5 days ago. The accounts are completely locked." At exactly 10:45 a.m., my phone began to vibrate on the glass table of my balcony. The caller ID flashed Victoria's name. I let it ring. It rang again and again. By the 4th time, she left a voicemail. I put the phone on speaker, took a slow sip of my coffee, and listened to the sound of an arrogant woman realizing she had just stepped on a landmine. "Maya, pick up the phone right now." Victoria's voice was shrill, completely stripped of its usual manufactured elegance. She was hyperventilating. "What did you do? The bank is telling me the trust is frozen. The vendors are calling me. If those wires don't clear by 5 o'clock today, they are canceling the entire wedding. Call the lawyers and drop this audit right now. You are ruining your sister's life." I didn't call her back. I simply opened my email and forwarded the vendor contracts she had so proudly shown me at the country club to Mr. Sterling. Victoria had made the ultimate fatal error. Because she was so confident the trust money would arrive, she had signed the vendor contracts using her own personal credit and her own name as the guarantor. She didn't just lose the wedding money. She was now personally, legally on the hook for $100,000 of debt she absolutely could not pay. "You aren't borrowing, Victoria," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotional reaction. "You are draining it. You and Chloe have racked up $100,000 in wedding expenses in less than 2 months. That money was left by my father for my future, not for a massive socialite party." Chloe rolled her eyes, scrolling through her phone without even looking up at me. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Maya. Daddy would have wanted me to have a beautiful, upper-class wedding. Besides, Mom is the legal trustee. She has the absolute right to allocate the funds until you turn 25 next week. We are just securing the payments before the final transfer. It's totally legal." I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't tell them that my late father had set up that exact trust fund specifically to protect me from the 2 greedy, manipulative women currently sitting across from me. To understand the absolute financial massacre I was about to unleash on my stepmother, you have to understand the sheer arrogance of people who refuse to read the fine print of a legal document. My name is Maya. I am 24 years old. When my biological mother passed away, my father, a highly successful and incredibly sharp estate attorney, eventually remarried Victoria. Victoria was a woman whose desperate love for high society status completely eclipsed her actual bank account. She came into our lives with her daughter, Chloe, and immediately started acting like they had won the lottery. When my father died unexpectedly of a heart attack 3 years ago, he left behind a massive estate. Victoria automatically inherited the primary residence and the standard life insurance policy, but my father knew exactly who he had married. To protect my inheritance, he placed the bulk of his liquid wealth, over $2 million, into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. Victoria was named the temporary trustee, meaning she could manage the investments and oversee the accounts, but she could not withdraw the principal amount without a judge's direct approval. The absolute control of the trust was scheduled to transfer entirely to me on my 25th birthday. However, Victoria was cunning, and she found a loophole she thought she could exploit. The trust allowed for emergency educational or vital family welfare withdrawals. When Chloe got engaged to a wealthy local heir, Victoria saw her ultimate opportunity. She needed to throw a wedding that proved they belonged in the absolute top tier of the city's high society. She couldn't afford a $100,000 wedding on her own, so she petitioned the local court to release the funds from my trust, claiming it was for a vital family welfare event to secure her daughter's future. The judge, who happened to be an old country club friend of Victoria's, rubber-stamped the withdrawal request without even calling me into the courtroom. The wedding was scheduled for the 15th of the month. My 25th birthday, the exact day the trust legally and permanently transferred entirely to my control, was the 17th. Victoria's plan was flawlessly cruel and timed down to the exact hour. She was going to drain the cash on the 14th, pay all the high-end vendors the day before the wedding, and hand me an empty, depleted account on my birthday. The vendors require full payment 24 hours before the event, Maya, Victoria said, tapping her manicured fingernail on the thick stack of contracts on the table. I have already signed personal guarantees for the florist, the master caterer, and the string quartet. The trust will disburse the funds directly to my personal checking account on the 14th. It's already been filed with the bank's wealth management division. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it. She smiled at me. It was a cold, victorious, incredibly smug smile. She truly believed she had completely outsmarted me. She thought I was just a quiet, helpless 24-year-old girl who would just sit back and watch her inheritance pay for a party I didn't even want to attend. She forgot one very crucial detail. I was my father's daughter, and my father made his living destroying people in court. I looked closely at the contracts she was so proudly displaying on the table. She had signed her own name on the primary liability lines. She had personally guaranteed $100,000 of unsecured debt, operating on the absolute assumption that my money would automatically cover the checks when they came due. I understand, I said softly, picking up my designer purse and sliding my chair back. I hope the wedding is exactly what Chloe deserves. I walked out of the country club, leaving them to their mimosas and their delusions of grandeur. I walked to my car, got into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I didn't cry. Crying is a biological response for people who don't have a plan. I pulled out my phone and dialed the private cell phone number of Mr. Sterling, the senior managing partner at my late father's corporate law firm. "Mr. Sterling," I said the moment he answered, turning the key in the ignition. Victoria just took the bait. She signed the personal guarantees for the wedding vendors using her own name. The trap is officially set. Let's initiate the freeze protocol. "Are you absolutely certain, Maya?" Mr. Sterling's deep, gravelly voice echoed through the phone. "Once we file this motion, it triggers a mandatory financial audit. Her accounts will be locked within 48 hours. "I am completely certain," I replied, pulling out of the parking lot. "She wants to play estate law with my father's money. Let's show her exactly how my father used to play the game." At 2:00 p.m. on Thursday, the frantic phone calls finally stopped. But I knew Victoria wasn't giving up. She was just relocating her panic. Exactly 30 minutes later, the heavy security buzzer in my luxury apartment lobby rang. The concierge's voice came through the intercom, sounding incredibly uncomfortable. "Ms. Vance, your stepmother and sister are in the lobby. They are causing quite a scene. Should I call building security?" I smiled, looking at my reflection in the dark glass of my window. "No, let them up, but keep security on standby." I unlocked my front door and left it slightly ajar. I walked over to my kitchen island, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and waited. Less than a minute later, the door burst open. Victoria and Chloe stumbled into my apartment. The transformation was genuinely spectacular. The poised, arrogant country club socialites were completely gone. Victoria's mascara was smudged, her hair was disheveled, and she was clutching a thick folder of vendor contracts to her chest like a shield. Chloe was trailing behind her, hyperventilating, her face red and puffy from crying. "You are going to fix this right now." Victoria shrieked, slamming the folder onto my granite kitchen counter. Call your lawyer. Call the bank. Tell them it was a misunderstanding and drop the audit. The caterer just sent an email saying if the wire isn't in their account by 5 o'clock, they are pulling the entire staff and canceling the food. I took a slow sip of my water, leaning against the counter. I can't do that, Victoria. A forensic audit ordered under the Beneficiary Protection Clause cannot be canceled once initiated. It is a federal bank regulation. The money is locked for the next 90 days. There is absolutely nothing I can do. You did this on purpose, Chloe screamed, stepping forward, her massive diamond ring flashing under my kitchen lights. You planned this. You're jealous. You're trying to ruin my wedding because nobody wants to marry you. I don't care about your wedding, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that instantly silenced the room. I care about my father's money. The money he worked 80 hours a week to build. The money you two tried to steal while treating me like garbage in my own family. Victoria's face drained of color. She looked at her watch. It was 4:15 p.m. Maya, please. Victoria's voice suddenly shifted from rage to pathetic, desperate begging. I signed personal guarantees for these contracts. $100,000. If they don't get paid today, they are going to sue me. I don't have that kind of liquid cash. I'll have to take out a high-interest loan. I'll be ruined. You should have read the fine print before you forged a lifestyle you couldn't afford, I replied coldly. You bet your financial life on a loophole and you lost. Now you are going to pay the bill. We are family, Victoria sobbed, literally dropping to her knees on my hardwood floor. Your father would be disgusted with you. My father, I said, stepping closer to her, was an estate lawyer. He would be incredibly proud that his daughter successfully protected his assets from a parasite. I looked up at the wall clock. It was 4:50 p.m. I suggest you leave, I told them. You have 10 minutes to call your guests and tell them there is no reception. They didn't leave immediately. They sat on my floor and watched the clock. At exactly 5:01 p.m., Chloe's phone chimed. It was an email from the Premium Country Club venue. The contract had officially been voided for non-payment. 2 minutes later, the caterer canceled. Then the florist. Then the string quartet. In the span of 5 minutes, the massive $100,000 high society wedding simply ceased to exist. Chloe let out a guttural scream, threw her phone against my wall, and ran out of the apartment. Victoria slowly stood up, looking like a ghost. She knew her life was completely over. She walked out without saying a single word. But the financial execution didn't stop there. When you operate in high society, rumors spread faster than a wildfire. By Friday morning, the wealthy family of Chloe's fiancé found out exactly why the wedding was canceled. They discovered that Victoria had attempted to commit fiduciary fraud to fund the event, and that she was now facing massive lawsuits from multiple vendors for breach of contract. Wealthy families despise public scandals, and they despise toxic debt. The fiancé's father ordered him to break off the engagement immediately. By Friday night, Chloe's massive diamond ring was gone, and she was blocked on every social media platform. On Sunday, my 25th birthday, I walked into Liberty Wealth Management. The forensic audit had cleared my father's accounts of any wrongdoing. I signed 3 pieces of paper, and the entire $2 million estate legally transferred into my sole possession. Fast forward to today, 8 months later. Let me give you the final audit of my stepmother's grand plan. Because Victoria had signed personal guarantees, the vendors sued her aggressively. To avoid jail time for fraud and to pay off the $100,000 debt, she was forced to sell the massive house she had inherited from my father. She sold it at a massive loss just to liquidate the cash quickly. She and Chloe now live in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Victoria works as a receptionist at a mid-level real estate firm, answering phones for women she used to look down on at the country club. Chloe is working retail, completely exiled from the high society circles she thought she belonged to. They have tried to call me several times, leaving pathetic voicemails asking for forgiveness, asking for a small loan just to help them get back on their feet. I listened to those voicemails while sitting in the home office of the beautiful house I bought with my inheritance. I listen, I smile, and then I press delete. Here is the final lesson. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. The most dangerous people in the room are never the ones screaming. They are the ones reading the contracts. If you try to steal the foundation from underneath a quiet person, do not be surprised when they legally drop the entire building on your head. If you loved this story, smash that like button, subscribe to the Revenge Room, and hit the notification bell. Protect your trust funds, read the fine print, and never let a parasite plan a party with your money. See you in the next one. You would think that losing a $100,000 wedding, being dumped by a wealthy fiancé, and being forced to sell your massive home to avoid bankruptcy would be enough to teach a person a lesson. But toxic people do not learn lessons. They only harbor resentment. They rewrite history to make themselves the victims. 6 months had passed since I completely dismantled Victoria and Chloe's financial lives. I was living peacefully in my new, custom-built home, entirely funded by my father's legally secured trust. I thought they had finally disappeared into the miserable, cramped apartment life they deserved. I was wrong. The knock on my front door came at 7:00 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday morning. I looked through the security camera and saw a man in a cheap windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. I knew exactly what he was before I even opened the door. "My advance?" the man asked, holding out the envelope. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "You've been served," he said, handing me the package and immediately turning around to walk back to his car. I closed the door, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a cup of black coffee before I even bothered to break the seal on the envelope. When you are the daughter of an elite corporate lawyer, a lawsuit doesn't terrify you, it just annoys you. I pulled out a stack of legal documents that was easily 60 pages thick. I scanned the front page. It was a civil lawsuit filed in the state superior court. The plaintiffs were Victoria and Chloe Vance. The defendant was me. The damages they were seeking, $2.5 million. I almost laughed out loud. I took my coffee to the kitchen island, opened the document, and began to read the absolute fiction they had constructed. They had managed to find a predatory, bottom-feeding attorney named Marcus Thorne, a man known in the city for taking desperate cases on contingency, meaning he only got paid if he won a settlement. Victoria's lawsuit was built on a legal concept called promissory estoppel and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Victoria's lawyer claimed that I had made a firm, verbal promise to pay for Chloe's wedding, and that Victoria had reasonably relied on that promise when she signed the vendor contracts. The lawsuit stated that my decision to freeze the trust 24 hours before the event was not a legal right, but a malicious, premeditated act of emotional terrorism designed to publicly humiliate and financially ruin a grieving widow and her daughter. But the lawsuit wasn't even the worst part. I flipped to the very back of the packet and saw a separate filing stamped by a judge. It was a lease pendens, a formal notice of a pending legal action attached directly to the deed of my new house. Victoria's sleazy lawyer had convinced a judge to put a temporary lien on all of my major assets, claiming I was a flight risk who might hide my wealth before the trial. They had legally frozen my ability to sell my house, transfer my large cash reserves, or make any major financial moves until the $2.5 million lawsuit was resolved. Victoria thought she had me cornered. She thought that by freezing my assets and threatening to drag me through a humiliating, years-long public trial, I would panic and just write her a settlement check to make her go away. She wanted her country club life back, and she was going to use the court system to extort it out of me. I didn't panic. I didn't call her to scream. I simply picked up my phone and called Mr. Sterling. "Good morning, Maya," Mr. Sterling answered, his voice sharp and alert despite the early hour. "Mr. Sterling," I said calmly, "Victoria just served me. $2.5 million for emotional distress and breach of oral contract. She found an ambulance chaser named Marcus Thorne, and he managed to get a temporary freeze on my liquid assets." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard the distinctive sound of Mr. Sterling chuckling. It was a dark, dangerous sound. "Marcus Thorne," Mr. Sterling mused. "I know him. The man is a legal parasite. He throws massive numbers at the wall, hoping the defendant gets scared and settles out of court for a quick payout. They think they can bleed me dry with legal fees," I said, looking out at the rain hitting my kitchen window. "They want a settlement. Maya, your father and I built this firm by destroying men like Marcus Thorne," Mr. Sterling replied, his voice dropping into absolute predatory seriousness. "They want to drag you into a courtroom. Fine, we will drag them into a courtroom, but we are not going to defend you. We are going to countersue. I want you in my office at noon. Bring the entire packet. We are going to initiate the discovery phase, and we are going to subpoena every single text message, email, and bank record Victoria and Chloe have produced in the last 2 years. I smiled. The cold, calculated energy was rushing back into my veins. I'll see you at noon, Mr. Sterling. I hung up the phone. Victoria wanted a war. She didn't realize that she had just challenged the architect of her destruction to a rematch on my home turf. The conference room at Mr. Sterling's law firm didn't look like an office. It looked like a war room. When I arrived at noon, 3 junior partners were already sitting around the massive oak table, surrounded by stacks of financial ledgers and legal precedents. Mr. Sterling stood at the head of the table, looking incredibly energized. There is a specific kind of joy that an elite corporate lawyer experiences when they are handed a poorly constructed lawsuit. It is the joy of a predator watching its prey wander blindly into a dead end. Marcus Thorne is a volume litigator, Maya, Mr. Sterling explained, sliding a pristine, leather-bound dossier toward me. He files hundreds of these junk lawsuits a year, hoping to terrify the defendants into settling out of court for $50,000 or $100,000 just to make the legal fees stop. He doesn't actually want to go to trial. He assumes that because your assets are temporarily frozen, you will feel suffocated and beg for a negotiation. I sat down, opened the dossier, and looked at the timeline the junior partners had mapped out. He thinks I am going to run out of operating cash to fight him, I said, tracing my finger over the temporary lien document. Exactly, Mr. Sterling smiled, leaning forward. But what Mr. Thorne failed to research is that your father left a secondary, hidden operational account specifically designated for your legal defense in the event of a state litigation. It is completely insulated from the civil lien. We have an unlimited war chest, Maya, and we are going to use it to completely bury them in the discovery phase. For those who have never been involved in high-stakes litigation, discovery is the phase where both sides are legally required to hand over all evidence, communications, and documents relevant to the case. Most people assume lawsuits are won in front of a judge with dramatic speeches. The truth is, lawsuits are won in discovery. People lie under oath all the time, but people are incredibly, shockingly stupid on their cell phones. Mr. Sterling immediately filed a massive, incredibly aggressive subpoena demanding every single text message, email, social media direct message, and deleted iCloud backup from both Victoria and Chloe's phones spanning the last 2 years. Thorne immediately filed a motion to block our subpoena, claiming it was an invasion of privacy. We dragged him into front of a judge the very next morning. Mr. Sterling argued that since Victoria's entire lawsuit rested on an alleged verbal promise I made to fund the wedding, their private communications discussing my finances were the absolute core evidence of the case. The judge agreed with us and gave them 48 hours to surrender their devices to an independent digital forensics firm. The silence from Victoria's camp for the next 3 weeks was deafening. They were terrified. They handed over their phones, and the forensics team mirrored their hard drives. When Mr. Sterling finally called me back into his office to review the recovered data, he poured us both a glass of expensive scotch. He never drank during the day unless he had found a kill shot. "Read Exhibit A," he said, handing me a printed transcript of a text message thread. It was a conversation between Victoria and Chloe, dated exactly 1 week before the disastrous country club brunch where Victoria had tried to force me to pay for the wedding. Chloe: "Mom, the florist said if we don't have the $100K secured by next month, they drop us. Did you talk to the brat yet?" Victoria: "Not yet. I'm taking her to the club on Tuesday. She won't pay for it willingly." "I've already spoken to the judge. I'm going to petition the trust directly." Chloe: "What if she finds out and tries to block it before my birthday?" Victoria: "She won't. She's too stupid to understand estate law. We drain the cash on the 14th. By the time she gets the account on her birthday, the checks will have already cleared. She can cry about it later." I read the texts twice. The cold, mechanical part of my brain clicked into high gear. There was no mention of a verbal promise. There was no mention of an agreement. It was, in black and white text, a premeditated conspiracy to commit fiduciary fraud and blindside me. But it got better. Mr. Sterling handed me Exhibit B. It was a text thread from just 3 weeks ago, shortly before they filed the $2.5 million lawsuit. Chloe: "Mom, my credit card declined again. We live in a dump. I hate this." Victoria: "I know, sweetie, but Marcus Thorne said we have a strong case. If we sue Maya for emotional distress and freeze her new house, she'll panic. Thorne said rich people hate court. We will ask for 2.5 million, but Thorne says she'll probably offer us 500K just to settle and unlock her accounts. That's enough for us to get out of this apartment. I set the paper down. They hadn't just conspired to steal from me the first time. They were actively conspiring to commit extortion through the legal system. They just handed us the rope, I whispered. And now, Mr. Sterling said, finishing his scotch, we let them put it around their own necks. We don't show Marcus Thorne these text messages yet. We wait for the depositions. We get them under oath on camera and we make them lie. Once they commit perjury on the official record, we drop the hammer. Fast forward 2 months. It was a freezing November morning. I walked into the glass-walled conference room of a neutral arbitration building. The room was perfectly sterile. A court reporter sat in the corner, her fingers hovering over her stenograph machine. A video camera was set up on a tripod, a red light blinking softly, recording everything. Victoria and Chloe sat across the long table. They looked pale and nervous, but Victoria still carried that desperate, manufactured arrogance. Beside them sat their lawyer, Marcus Thorne. He was wearing a cheap suit that didn't quite fit, and he looked at me with a smug, dismissive smirk. He genuinely thought he was about to bully a 25-year-old girl into handing over a massive settlement check. Mr. Sterling sat next to me. He meticulously adjusted his cuffs, opened his perfectly organized leather binder, and looked across the table at Victoria. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling began, his voice smooth and deceptively polite. "You are under oath today. Everything you say is being recorded for the court. Do you understand the penalties for perjury in this state?" "I understand," Victoria said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Excellent," Mr. Sterling replied. "Let's begin with the foundation of your lawsuit. You claim that Maya Vance explicitly, verbally promised to fund your daughter's wedding. Is that correct?" "Yes, she promised me at the country club," Victoria lied smoothly, not even blinking. "And you relied on that promise when you signed the vendor contracts." "Absolutely," Victoria said, sounding almost convincingly victimized. "Maya told me to sign them. She said she would handle the financials. And then, out of pure malice, she froze the accounts to humiliate us." Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch out in the room for a painfully long time. He reached into his binder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling said, the polite tone completely vanishing from his voice, replaced by cold, absolute steel. "Let's talk about the text messages you sent to your daughter 1 week prior to that country club meeting. The ones you thought you deleted." The smug smirk instantly melted off Marcus Thorne's face. Victoria stopped breathing. The execution was about to begin. The air in the sterile conference room instantly turned to lead. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, his cheap suit crinkling, his eyes darting between his client and the single sheet of paper in Mr. Sterling's hand. "Objection," Thorne stammered, though objections in a deposition are mostly for the record. "Counsel is ambushing my client with unverified digital documents." Mr. Sterling didn't even look at Thorne. He kept his predatory gaze locked entirely on Victoria. "These documents were extracted directly from your client's iCloud backup by a court-appointed digital forensics firm, Mr. Thorne. They are verified, time-stamped, and utterly damning." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "She won't pay for it willingly. I've already spoken to the judge. I'm going to petition the trust directly. She's too stupid to understand estate law. We drain the cash on the 14th. She can cry about it later." Mr. Sterling tossed the paper onto the table so it slid directly in front of Victoria. "Mrs. Vance, does that sound like a woman relying on a verbal promise? Or does it sound like a premeditated conspiracy to commit fiduciary fraud against a beneficiary?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. She looked at the text messages, her perfectly manicured hands beginning to shake violently. Chloe shrank back into her chair, her eyes wide with absolute terror. "Don't answer that," Thorne snapped at Victoria. He turned to Mr. Sterling, his face flushed red. "This is out of line, Sterling. Even if she sent those texts, it doesn't invalidate the emotional distress your client intentionally caused by waiting until the last minute to freeze the funds." "Ah, intentional emotional distress," Mr. Sterling said smoothly, reaching back into his leather binder. "I am so glad you brought that up, Mr. Thorne, because my next exhibit addresses the exact intent of this entire multi-million-dollar lawsuit." He pulled out a second sheet of paper and slid it across the table. "Exhibit B, a text thread from 3 weeks ago, between Victoria and Chloe Vance." Thorne reached out and grabbed the paper before Victoria could touch it. I watched Thorne's eyes scan the text. I watched the exact moment his legal career flashed before his eyes. He read the part where Victoria admitted she was only suing me to extort a $500,000 settlement so she could move out of her cheap apartment. "Mr. Thorne," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "Your clients are currently on the record, under oath, committing perjury. Furthermore, these text messages prove that this lawsuit is not a genuine grievance. It is a documented attempt at criminal extortion using the civil court system. Your clients are weaponizing a false narrative to defraud Maya Vance of $500,000. Thorne dropped the paper as if it were on fire. He was a bottom feeder, but he wasn't suicidal. He knew that if he continued to represent clients actively committing perjury and extortion, he would be disbarred, stripped of his license, and potentially face criminal conspiracy charges himself. "We need a recess," Thorne said, his voice cracking. "I need to confer with my clients outside." "There will be no recess, Marcus," Mr. Sterling commanded, the absolute authority of a 40-year veteran silencing the room. "The trap has already snapped shut. You have two choices. You can stop this recording right now, formally withdraw this lawsuit with prejudice, and immediately petition the judge to remove the lien on my client's property. Or, I will take this video recording and these transcripts directly to the district attorney's office this afternoon and have your clients arrested for perjury, attempted grand larceny, and extortion. And I will personally ensure the Bar Association reviews your involvement in filing a fraudulent claim." Victoria finally broke. The manufactured illusion of her high society grace shattered into a million pieces. She started sobbing, burying her face in her hands. Chloe was hyperventilating, rocking back and forth in her expensive, out-of-season designer chair. "We withdraw," Thorne said immediately, completely throwing his clients under the bus to save his own license. "We will drop the suit with prejudice. I will file the paperwork to lift the lien today." "That is a wise decision for your career, Mr. Thorne," I said, speaking for the first time since the deposition began. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. I kept my voice perfectly flat, perfectly cold. "But simply dropping the lawsuit doesn't compensate me for the legal fees I've incurred, or the absolute inconvenience of having a lien attached to my property." Victoria looked up at me, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. "What more do you want, Maya? You won. We have nothing left. You took our house, you took Chloe's wedding, and now you want to ruin us completely." "I didn't take anything from you, Victoria," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "You lost those things because you tried to steal them from me. You played a high-stakes game with my father's money and you lost. And now I am collecting the final penalty." I looked at Mr. Sterling, who nodded in agreement. "In exchange for not sending you both to a federal penitentiary for extortion," I continued, staring directly into Victoria's terrified eyes, "you are going to sign a legally binding non-disclosure and no-contact agreement. You will never speak my name to another human being. You will never contact me again. And to cover my legal fees, you are going to hand over the only asset you have left that holds any value." Victoria gasped, her eyes widening in horror. "No, please." "Yes," I said softly. "The life insurance policy my father left you, the remaining $200,000. You are going to sign the entire sum over to my trust by 5:00 p.m. tomorrow. If that money is not in my account, Mr. Sterling walks to the district attorney." The silence in the conference room was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the ragged, shallow breathing of my stepsister. Victoria stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and absolute terror. The $200,000 from my father's life insurance policy was her final safety net. It was the only reason she hadn't ended up entirely on the street after the wedding vendor lawsuits liquidated her house. It was her emergency fund, her last tie to the luxury she believed she was entitled to. "You can't take that," Victoria whispered, her voice cracking. "That was left to me. Your father wanted me to have that. If you take it, we literally have nothing to fall back on. We won't be able to pay rent next month." "My father also wanted me to have my trust fund, Victoria," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "But that didn't stop you from trying to steal it to throw a party. You initiated this lawsuit. You attempted extortion. You brought a $2.5 million claim against me based entirely on a lie. You gambled your last safety net and you lost." I looked at Mr. Sterling. He seamlessly pulled a pre-drafted settlement agreement and a wire transfer authorization form from his binder. He had prepared them that morning. He always knew exactly how the board was going to look before the chess match even started. He slid the documents across the table, along with his expensive gold pen. "Sign it, Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling commanded. I hit send on the email to the district attorney. "You have 30 seconds to decide if you want to be poor or if you want to be poor and in a federal prison." Marcus Thorne, eager to separate himself from the criminal conspiracy as quickly as possible, leaned over to Victoria. "Sign the papers, Victoria," he hissed through gritted teeth. "If they take this to the DA, I can't protect you. You'll do 5 to 10 years for extortion. Sign the damn papers." Victoria looked down at the documents. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen. Chloe was weeping silently beside her, realizing that her days of relying on her mother's hidden cash reserves were permanently over. Victoria pressed the pen to the paper and signed away the last remnant of my father's wealth. She signed the wire transfer authorization, the non-disclosure agreement, and the no-contact order. The moment she finished, Mr. Sterling pulled the papers back, checked the signatures, and closed his binder. "The deposition is concluded," Mr. Sterling announced to the room. "Have a pleasant afternoon." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the conference room without giving them a second glance. The next afternoon, at precisely 4:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from Liberty Wealth Management. The wire transfer had cleared. $200,000 was deposited directly into my private account. Fast forward to today, a year and a half later. Let me give you the final, complete audit of the Vance family. With the life insurance money gone, Victoria and Chloe spiraled into absolute financial ruin. Without the cash to cover the rent on their apartment, they were evicted 3 months later. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were forced to move into a cheap motel on the absolute worst side of the city while applying for government assistance. Victoria, the woman who used to wear Prada to the country club, is now working as a night shift cashier at a 24-hour pharmacy. Chloe, whose massive diamond ring was repossessed by her ex-fiancé, works at a fast food drive-thru. They are permanently blacklisted from every high society circle in the state. Because of the NDA they signed, they can never even complain about me to anyone without risking immediate legal action. They are trapped in poverty, silenced, and entirely forgotten. And as for the $200,000 I took from Victoria, I didn't need it. My trust fund had already secured my financial independence. So, on the anniversary of my father's death, I took the entire sum and donated it to a charity that provides legal aid to underprivileged youth who are victims of financial abuse by their guardians. My father made his living fighting in courtrooms, and now his money is funding the next generation of fighters. I live in peace. I manage my investments, I travel, and I sleep perfectly at night in a quiet, beautiful home. Here is the final lesson. Arrogance will convince you that you are untouchable, but greed will blind you to the trap you are walking into. When you try to destroy a quiet person, you assume their silence is weakness. You never realize that while you are screaming and demanding attention, they are calmly reviewing the rules of the game you are about to lose. If you loved this multi-part saga, smash that like button, subscribe to the Revenge Room, and hit the notification bell. Protect your peace, read the fine print, and never let greedy people write checks with your life. See you in the next one. The silence in the conference room was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the ragged, shallow breathing of my stepsister. Victoria stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and absolute terror. The $200,000 from my father's life insurance policy was her final safety net. It was the only reason she hadn't ended up entirely on the street after the wedding vendor lawsuits liquidated her house. It was her emergency fund, her last tie to the luxury she believed she was entitled to. "You can't take that," Victoria whispered, her voice cracking. "That was left to me. Your father wanted me to have that. If you take it, we literally have nothing to fall back on. We won't be able to pay rent next month. My father also wanted me to have my trust fund, Victoria," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "But that didn't stop you from trying to steal it to throw a party. You initiated this lawsuit. You attempted extortion. You brought a $2.5 million claim against me based entirely on a lie. You gambled your last safety net and you lost." I looked at Mr. Sterling. He seamlessly pulled a pre-drafted settlement agreement and a wire transfer authorization form from his binder. He had prepared them that morning. He always knew exactly how the board was going to look before the chess match even started. He slid the documents across the table, along with his expensive gold pen. "Sign it, Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling commanded, "or I hit send on the email to the district attorney. You have 30 seconds to decide if you want to be poor or if you want to be poor and in a federal prison." Marcus Thorne, eager to separate himself from the criminal conspiracy as quickly as possible, leaned over to Victoria. "Sign the papers, Victoria," he hissed through gritted teeth. "If they take this to the DA, I can't protect you. You'll do 5 to 10 years for extortion. Sign the damn papers." Victoria looked down at the documents. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen. Chloe was weeping silently beside her, realizing that her days of relying on her mother's hidden cash reserves were permanently over. Victoria pressed the pen to the paper and signed away the last remnant of my father's wealth. She signed the wire transfer authorization, the non-disclosure agreement, and the no-contact order. The moment she finished, Mr. Sterling pulled the papers back, checked the signatures, and closed his binder. "The deposition is concluded," Mr. Sterling announced to the room. "Have a pleasant afternoon." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the conference room without giving them a second glance. The next afternoon, at precisely 4:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from Liberty Wealth Management. The wire transfer had cleared. $200,000 was deposited directly into my private account. Fast forward to today, a year and a half later. Let me give you the final, complete audit of the Vance family. With the life insurance money gone, Victoria and Chloe spiraled into absolute financial ruin. Without the cash to cover the rent on their apartment, they were evicted 3 months later. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were forced to move into a cheap motel on the absolute worst side of the city while applying for government assistance. Victoria, the woman who used to wear Prada to the country club, is now working as a night shift cashier at a 24-hour pharmacy. Chloe, whose massive diamond ring was repossessed by her ex-fiancé, works at a fast food drive-thru. They are permanently blacklisted from every high society circle in the state. Because of the NDA they signed, they can never even complain about me to anyone without risking immediate legal action. They are trapped in poverty, silenced, and entirely forgotten. And as for the $200,000 I took from Victoria, I didn't need it. My trust fund had already secured my financial independence. So, on the anniversary of my father's death, I took the entire sum and donated it to a charity that provides legal aid to underprivileged youth who are victims of financial abuse by their guardians. My father made his living fighting in courtrooms, and now his money is funding the next generation of fighters. I live in peace. I manage my investments, I travel, and I sleep perfectly at night in a quiet, beautiful home. Here is the final lesson. Arrogance will convince you that you are untouchable, but greed will blind you to the trap you are walking into. When you try to destroy a quiet person, you assume their silence is weakness. You never realize that while you are screaming and demanding attention, they are calmly reviewing the rules of the game you are about to lose. If you loved this multi-part saga, smash that like button, subscribe to the Revenge Room, and hit the notification bell. Protect your peace, read the fine print, and never let greedy people write checks with your life. See you in the next one. There is a specific kind of silence that exists in a 24-hour pharmacy at 3 in the morning. It isn't peaceful, it is hollow. It is the sound of fluorescent lights buzzing over cheap linoleum floors. 3 years and 6 months after the collapse of my stepmother's multi-million-dollar extortion plot, Victoria Vance was standing behind the register of register number 3, listening to that exact silence. She was wearing a cheap, synthetic blue smock over her clothes. Her name tag, written in faded black marker, simply said, Vicky. The woman who used to spend her Tuesday afternoons sipping mimosas and terrorizing country club waiters was now spending her nights scanning discounted cough syrup and ringing up toilet paper. Victoria kept her head down, mindlessly restocking a display of chewing gum. She had spent the last 3 years mastering the art of invisibility. When you fall from high society, your greatest fear isn't starvation. It is being recognized. At 3:15 a.m., the automatic glass doors of the pharmacy slid open. The sudden chime echoed through the empty store. Victoria didn't look up immediately. She heard the sharp, confident click of expensive designer heels walking down the main aisle. It was a sound she recognized instantly. It was a sound she used to make. The customer approached the register and placed a single item on the counter, a bottle of premium imported water. "Just this, please," a refined, older woman's voice said. Victoria froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She recognized that voice. It was Eleanor Harrington. Eleanor was the matriarch of one of the wealthiest families in the city. More importantly, she was the mother of the man Chloe had been engaged to. She was the woman who had personally canceled the wedding the moment she found out Victoria was facing a $100,000 fraud lawsuit. Victoria kept her chin tucked to her chest, her hands trembling as she reached for the scanner. She prayed to whatever God was listening that Eleanor wouldn't look closely at the tired, aging woman behind the plastic register shield. She scanned the water. "That will be $4.50, Victoria mumbled, trying to disguise her voice. Eleanor handed over a heavy metal American Express Centurion card. As Victoria took the card, her hand shook visibly. Eleanor's eyes dropped to the trembling hands, then moved up to the blue smock, and finally locked onto Victoria's face. The silence that followed lasted for 5 excruciating seconds. It felt like a century. Eleanor didn't gasp. She didn't laugh. She didn't say a single cruel word. Instead, her expression softened into something far more devastating than hatred. It was pure, unadulterated pity. "Victoria," Eleanor whispered, her voice laced with absolute shock and a deep, crushing sorrow. Victoria felt a hot tear spill over her eyelid. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, swiping the black card through the cheap plastic reader. I had heard you fell on hard times after the legal troubles," Eleanor said gently, taking the card back. "But I had no idea it was this severe. Are you and Chloe all right?" "We are fine, Eleanor," Victoria choked out, her voice brittle and defensive, trying to summon a ghost of her former arrogance. "Just a temporary setback, rebuilding." Eleanor looked at the faded name tag, the exhausted bags under Victoria's eyes, and the cheap blue smock. She knew it wasn't temporary. She knew it was a life sentence. Eleanor opened her designer handbag, pulled out a crisp, brand-new $100 bill, and slid it across the counter. "Keep the change, Vicky," Eleanor said softly, using the name on the tag instead of the name she used to know. "Please, buy yourself something warm. The nights are getting cold." Eleanor turned and walked out of the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind her. Victoria stood entirely paralyzed behind the register. The $100 bill sat on the counter, mocking her. 3 years ago, she would have spent $100 on a single glass of wine without blinking. Now, a woman she used to view as an equal had just tipped her $100 out of sheer, heartbreaking charity. Victoria realized in that exact moment that the financial ruin Maya had inflicted on her wasn't the actual punishment. The true punishment was the absolute, total loss of her dignity. She was no longer a threat. She was no longer a rival. She was just a tragedy. Victoria slowly reached out, picked up the $100 bill with a shaking hand, and put it in her pocket. She needed the money to pay her electric bill. She leaned against the counter, buried her face in her hands, and finally wept under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. If you loved this complete, unedited saga, smash that like button, subscribe to the Revenge Room, and hit the notification bell. Karma doesn't just empty your bank account, it forces you to look in the mirror. See you in the next one.